Welcome and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm Doreen Anderson and I'm Senior Knowledge Exchange Manager for AHDB Dairy in Scotland. I'm joined this afternoon with a lovely bunch of ladies who are all professionals based in the southwest of Scotland and work mainly with clients within the agricultural industry. And you will meet them all properly in a minute. I'm just going to start with a couple of housekeeping rules. All participants are muted and you can ask questions using the chat function at the side of your screen as we go along. The event timings we're aiming to finish at 1, but given that we've got quite a lot to get through today, we may run over. However, it is recorded and you'll be able to watch it after the event should you wish to do so and catch up. We would like you to complete the survey at the end to help us improve our webinars in the future. Next slide, please. So how to ask a question. If you press the orange, click on the arrow in the orange box and type in your question and then press send. We aim to ask questions throughout the whole of the webinar, but if we don't get to everything, we will ask a Q&A at the end, and then we will go on to, if we don't answer everything, we'll get back to you afterwards. Okay, next slide. So who are we? In my top left-hand corner, I'm going to say there's Laura Simpson, who is a ProMar consultant. Good afternoon, Laura.
Hi, everybody.
We've then got Karen Baird, who is up in my right hand from Holland Baird, who is our solicitor.
Good afternoon.
Ailey Harman is from Bell Ogilvie, who's from the Chartered Accountants. And we've got Heather Wildman, who will be setting you all a challenge of how to get this conversation started. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining us, and I'm sure that we'll have quite a bit of conversations going on as we get there. So I'll set the scene and how this came about. Got next slide. Yeah, thank you. So we joined up as a bit of a ladies for lunch going back quite some time now, and we were having a look round the table, if you like, and looking at the professions that were sitting at that lunch, and we decided that we'd maybe put something on live event at that time and bring some of the opportunity to ask questions throughout the industry and invite some farmers, etc., along. However, COVID came along and we decided that that was not going to happen. However, when things opened up again in April, we decided that we would do something live and on the webinar, and potentially that would open up the opportunity to share what we're going to talk about today to a wider audience. It brought me in mind of the booklet, the Horizon booklet that AHDB wrote back in 2018, which doesn't really go out of date, and looking at the characteristics of top performing farms. And when you look at the top 8 in the characteristics, an awful lot of what we're going to talk about today actually is within those characteristics. So the first one, for example, minimising overhead costs. Well, you need to know what those overhead costs are to begin with in order to be able to minimise them. Understanding the market, so knowing what your income is, where you're going to sell it and how you're going to achieve that. And focusing on detail. Attention to detail seems to be the secret to success. So next slide, please. So we're going to start this today with Ailey. So Ailey, as I said before, is a partner at Bell Ogilvie in Castle Douglas. So over to you, Ailey.
Hello, thanks very much for signing up to the webinar today. As Doreen said, I'm Ailey Harman and I'm a partner at Bell Ogilvie Chartered Accountants, and we are based in Castle Douglas. We've recently celebrated our 100-year anniversary, so we have been around for a while. Many of our clients are in agriculture, so we deal with farming businesses on a day-to-day basis and are very familiar with them. So you'll all receive a set of accounts from your accountant every year prepared to your year end, showing how the business has done for the previous 12 months. But how many of you really understand what these accounts mean? It's important that you understand what the accountant's preparing for you so that you can use the figures to your advantage. After all, you are paying for this service. There are many people who want their accounts prepared just to allow them to complete their tax return, calculate any tax that they've got to pay. But there are many other uses that these historical accounts could be used for. They're most useful to you if you can have them prepared as soon after your year end as possible. So if you're someone who sits on the information that your accountant needs for months, or sometimes more than a year after the year end, then the information that you will eventually get from them will be out of date. So it'll only really be of use for your tax obligations. But if you're paying for these accounts, you're better to get as much out of them as you possibly can. So if you can get the information to your accountant quickly, then the accounts can be used for many things. For example, the banks will need a copy to rearrange any overdrafts or to make sure that you're keeping to the terms of their loans. If you don't want the bank chasing you, then the quicker you get their accounts done, the happier the bank's going to be. If your accounts highlight something that isn't going well or that hasn't been done correctly, for example, from a bookkeeping perspective, the sooner the accounts are prepared, then the sooner this error can be remedied and make sure that it's corrected ongoing. Your accounts can also be broken down into enterprises. So if you give your accountant enough information, we can make sure that you can see which enterprises are making money and which ones aren't. Laura's going to talk to you more about enterprises later on. The accounts that we prepare clearly show a historical pattern. So it's easy to see if there's something unusual from a particular year, or if there's something that you can improve on, or it highlights areas that you want to focus on in the future. This can also help if you're preparing cash flow projections for a new venture. Often the bank will need these cash flow projections, or they're helpful to have for yourself too, so you know what to expect. Again, Laura's going to talk to you more about this in detail, but our accounts are a useful starting point for that. Next slide, please. So when you go to your accounts meeting with your accountant, who do you take with you? All the partners in the business? Any children that aren't yet partners? It's important that the next generation know what to expect and have an understanding of what they're going to be taking on. The profit and loss account shows how much profit the business has made for the year, and the balance sheet shows the assets and the liabilities of the farm. It is important that everyone in the business is aware of what belongs to the partnership and what the partnership owes. The next generation may not be aware of debt that the farm has and the cash that is needed to be generated to cover the debt. So meeting with your accountant is a good chance to discuss the matters like these and the plans for handing across the business. Next slide. Communication is one of the main themes from this webinar today. And the clients we feel that get the best service from us are the ones who ask the most questions. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We would rather you asked us 20 questions and came away from your meeting understanding the accounts, rather than you don't ask anything and you don't understand anything that's being prepared for you. And it's not just at your annual accounts meeting that you can ask questions. You should be asking questions throughout the year. For example, do you usually HP a tractor? But has someone suggested to you that you might be better leasing one? Speak to your accountant first. Things like this have tax implications, and we can do a much better job advising you if we have the chance to help with the decision making, rather than once the transaction has taken place. Next slide. There have been a lot of changes in recent years regarding digital VAT, and there are further changes to come for income tax. So it's important that you keep up to date with your accountant in case there is anything that you need to do to comply with HMR's changes, which are coming sooner rather than people expect. If you do your own bookkeeping, there are various software packages that you can use. Most are cloud-based now, which means you don't download them onto your computer. Instead, you access them via the internet. However, if your internet access isn't great, this might not suit you. The software you use has to be suitable for you, but also ask what your accountant's preference is too. Their staff will be much more experienced in the software they use daily, so if you have a problem with yours, it is easier for them to assist. If your bookkeeping is kept up to date, It allows your accountant to prepare the accounts for you prior to your year end. So for example, a 10-month period, if you're considering some capital expenditure, or perhaps a pension contribution for tax saving purposes. If everything is kept up to date, it makes it easier for us to help with any tax planning. So what message do I want you to take away from this? Keep your paperwork up to date, keep in touch with your accountant, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Accountants are dealing with lots of businesses and may have dealt with that very scenario already, so are equipped to give advice and examples. Sometimes you will need to dig deeper into your numbers, further than your annual accounts will take you. So I'm going to hand over to Laura now, who will talk more about that with you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ailey, that's lovely. So welcome, Laura, if you want to carry on and give us a little bit more about the enterprises and how the businesses can be split out. Hang on, Laura, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
I'm sorry about that. My name's Laura Stevenson. I'm a farm business consultant for Cromer. I work across a very varied number of businesses, from dairy farms, beef and sheep farms, and do a varied job for them. I want to talk to you today about your business at an enterprise level, which to an extent I could probably tell you all the ways that you could do it, but I think what was really important, the message I want to get over today, is why it is so important. I think generally, historically, people look at their business as a standalone enterprise, and that's really just not the case. Next slide, please. So why does it matter? Why does it actually matter how your farm is performing on a business, on an enterprise level? Because quite often what you'll find is that one part of the business will support another part of the business through a bit of a tough time. And that's fine, you know, that is, you know, farming is very fluid, but the problem becomes when one enterprise year on year is not performing as well as it should do. And you really need to find that out. I've got a bit of a breakdown here of different enterprises, and every single farm will be slightly different. And an awful lot of the time, you know, I find that people are actually battling a little bit against their farm. And, you know, that might be something as simple as ground really struggling to cope with wheat, for example, in Scotland because of pH problems. And there's a whole variety of different ways to look at your business, but you really need to know what overheads are going into those businesses to actually understand how much of a profit they're making. Next slide, please. This is a really interesting slide. This was a study that was done on a beef enterprise, and this shows, you can see I hope you can see the different boxes representing the different costs. So the variable costs are in the blue. The overhead costs are in orange, and you can see at the very top that is the price per head. Now, what is the really interesting thing here is the massive range in costs of overheads. And overheads really are one of the biggest drivers within your profit and loss. And it's so important to have an understanding of how your enterprises individually drive those overheads. Now, that might be something as simple as land rent, it could be labour, but you need to understand what enterprises are driving which overhead costs. The arrows that I put on here were actually for one of these farms within the study, and you can see where, hopefully you can see where the variable costs and the overhead costs were, and that represented within that business that for every store sold, there was a £25 loss. And these are the things that you really need to understand, because really, like I've said there, if an enterprise is driving additional overheads and you know it's making far bigger contribution to your overdraft than your profit, then you really need to know about that. And next slide, please. What happens after you've separated all these enterprises out is normally the most difficult part. And I think everybody on this webinar today are people that need to be, or often are, involved in these discussions when you understand that you've maybe got a few problems within your enterprises. And it's difficult, it's very difficult once you see that certain parts of your farm aren't performing very well, because people, you know, people do farm a little bit with regards to the past rather than the present. And the main thing that I find is once you have a conversation with farmers about the fact that a certain part of their business isn't performing very well, whilst it would seem very hard to argue with that, it's often very easy to ignore a small loss. And this is where, as Ailey was talking about, you know, the figures that you get from an accountant, this is where they come in really, really useful, because you can take those figures and then you can work out, you know, take from that historical spending and work out a cash flow. Because quite often what I find people say is, even though a business is making a loss, because they get cash flow at a certain point of the year, it's worthwhile because they see it plugging an overdraft. Now, where a cash flow is so important is you can see from that cash flow whether or not that would be the case. So it gives you an ability to forward plan from what is historical information. And that's why it's so very important that when you're dealing with your accountant, like Ailey said, you ask lots of questions and you provide as much information as possible, because it makes that paperwork so much more useful in order to do projections, to do cash flows and to do budgets. The other thing I absolutely think you should do is you should look at every individual enterprise and do a SWOT analysis. Now, you can see at the bottom there I've listed a few different things beneath each one. And in each individual business, you'll find that some businesses' strengths will be another business's weakness. But it's so important to be able to understand what are actually the strengths and weaknesses within that enterprise in order to make the right answer, to make the right decision, because there is very seldom one right answer, and everybody across the business will very possibly have their own opinion on that. So it's very important to make sure that you properly evaluate the enterprise once you understand whether it is or is not making a profit. Next slide, please. Now, I think Doreen's going to talk to you a little bit more about this after, but I hope everybody has already heard about the DEFRA Future Farming Resilience Fund. And to be honest, this today is a little bit of a precursor of it. And actually, Doreen was in front of the trend because she was actually discussing doing this long before the Resilience Fund actually became commonplace. So I would absolutely ask you all to take part in it. It's only in England. There are 19 different companies that are carrying it out. Promar are doing some, AHDB are doing some, and then there's a list on the DEFRA website of all the other consultants that are carrying out these this advice. It really will very much go through every single thing you'll hear today in lots of detail, and it's free. And I really would like to think if that was one of the only things, apart from everything we've told you today, you took away from today, that would be great. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy what everybody else has to say.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. Ailey, I have a question that's just came in here just now. How many years of accounts would you use when you're evaluating your business? You're not, sorry, can't hear you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It would, I suppose it depends, you know, if your business has been the same year on year, usually we would probably look back sort of 3 to 5 years just to get an overview, because there might have been something funny has happened in one of those years. So generally we tend to look back 3 to 5 years to take any patterns from that period. I mean, we could look back longer if, you know, if someone had a reason to, if there was something that they knew that had happened at some point and they wanted to go back to a certain point in time. But if you're just looking over the past few years and then taking any patterns from there.
Yeah, perfect. And that you'd use that, and that'll take into account weather and that sort of thing as well. And you could use them to forward forecast, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Give you an idea. As you say, I think the secret is if it's not expanded or got smaller or anything else, it's the trends, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, that's lovely. Thank you. Can I just encourage everybody to type in questions as you have them, and then we'll come back to them. So thank you, Laura. So it's my little bit now. So as I said at the beginning, Doreen Anderson, Senior Knowledge Exchange Manager for Dairy in Scotland. Next slide, please, Laura. Emily. So where do you start? Ailey's covered off the sort of what's happened in the past. Laura's broke your business up, but let's go even one more step. And I think one of the things we've always said when we were doing the benchmarking groups and things, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. So understanding how your farm is performing is absolutely critical, and having a handle on where you are now is fundamental to help make decisions on how to improve your business going forward. But keeping it simple is the key. And so what is a KPI? We all talk about KPIs and we think we just talk about it in our language as if everybody knows what it is. It's something just as a very small part, a very starting point of giving you an idea of what could good look like. What does good look like on an average across the country or in performance? It could be something like setting a target on how many cows are calving in the first 6 weeks. And it's by getting that line in the sand. But what's really important is what's happening on your farm here and now, and what is realistically something that you could achieve. Next slide, please. So where do you start? But then why would you want to set a target? Why would you want to start? So if you set a target, then it's something that you can aim at and reflect back on. And then you start looking at what have you done physically that's implemented something even financially, and what do you want to measure? As I said, you could set something up for fertility, and then how many cows are calving in the first 6 weeks. So this would then show if you're on target or if you're not on target, and areas of where you should be looking at. So how are you performing at the moment is really important, but what's realistically something that you could achieve? But it's not just about you, it could potentially be other members of your family or other members of the team. So you have to make sure that you share these, and you make sure that you share these ideas and what you want to do, and make it sure that it's shared out loud. Next slide, please. So some of the tools that we've got at AHDB, for example, is the KPI Express tool. And again, this is quite a simple tool that you can put your own numbers in. You register yourself, you put your own numbers in, and it will give you an idea of where you are on a bar chart. So green being in the top 10% of averages, and red is highlighting that this is an area that you need to really start focusing on and start looking at, because potentially you should be achieving better. So set the realistic target and understand what you want to achieve from this. But as I said before, involving the whole team is really important, because everybody contributes to every part of that farm and every part of you achieving a good business output. Next slide, please. So that leads us nicely on to Heather when I mentioned about teams and involving others. So Heather, over to you.
Thank you, Doreen. I'm delighted to be part of this great webinar today. I'm Heather Wildman, Saviour Associates, influencing and motivating positive change, soft skills with a sledgehammer. I cover all of the UK, national, work with multi-enterprises, and it's a delight to be able to be in this privileged position. Next slide, please, Emily. So, planning for today and planning for the future, for me, it's about making time to think about what you are actually doing and why you are doing it. We only have one life. We only get the opportunity to live and do what we want to do once, really. So what are you doing it and why are you doing it? And do you enjoy what you're actually doing? Next slide, please. And how old do you need to be before you know what's going on? And whose role is it to bring up these conversations? And for me, everybody, whether you are the exiting generation, do you know what you wanted to do, where you want to live, how much money you're going to need? Do you know who's going to come up to take over the reins? Have they got the skills that's needed? But also, if you're the new entrant coming into the business, it's really, really important to know what mum, dad, granny, grandpa, aunt and uncle are aspiring and expecting to do as well. Do they want to farm for the rest of their life, which is absolutely fine, or are they looking to leave at sort of 50, 60 and take on new opportunities? It's so important, and every one of you, I really urge you to stop now and think, why am I doing it? What am I going to need to live on? And am I actually enjoying what I'm doing? Next slide, please. Because I'm really, really privileged to work in agriculture, but it's not every day you see happy farmers. And you know, I do give some of them the benefit of the doubt that it's maybe their thinking faces, but a lot of farmers look blooming angry, very intense, and quite cheesed off. But you can really tell when someone loves what they're doing. Winners in life are those that are excited about what they're doing. And are you excited about what you do? Do you bounce out of bed every morning with a passion, a desire, and an energy and just love what you're doing? Or are you fed up? Are you angry? Are you depressed? And unfortunately, we see it in agriculture an awful lot of fed up, tired people. And I think now with the DEFRA, the new opportunities with the single farm payment, this is an opportunity to really interrogate, look into your business, and also look at yourself personally and think, why am I doing it? Next slide, please. And whenever I work with any client, these are the simple questions I ask. Where are you? Where do you want to be, and how are you going to get there? What is your dream? What's your ambition? What are your goals? What is good going to look like? What is going to make you feel proud and passionate and really satisfied at the end of your career and your working days? So everyone in your business, and this is where I see succession, it's all well and good when maybe there's just one individual working in the business or it's just the children, but often we blame the in-laws for confusing things and being the challenge. But if we need to know what is the vision, the dream and goal for everyone in your business, because if we're aligned and we're all going at the same pace and we've all got the same goal and ambition, that's great. But where it starts to fall down is when family alignment is different. So you might have someone that I just want to farm, I want to be my own boss, I want to nurture the land, my income's not really that important, I just want to love what I'm doing and have enough to get by. But if someone else in your business is really driven, really motivated, I want to grow the business, I want to breed the best genetics, I want to get the best prices, then that starts causing a problem and disparity between the family members. So it's really important to have your vision, your dream, your goal, and everyone in the business should share what theirs is as well. The next thing is then how to communicate it. And this can be the challenge because nobody is a mind reader. So we've got these brilliant professionals here as well. They are not mind readers either. So when you've got your vision, your dream and your goal, you need to then be able to verbalize it. And I love having it written down because if it's written down, it's 80% more likely to come true. If it's written down, you're accountable to it, you've got something to review and to look back on as well. But also other people can see where you're going. So depending if it's, you know, the family members, they should all know what your vision, your dream, your goal is. Your accountant, your bank manager, your lawyer, your consultant should all know as well, but also the people in your business as well. Now, different people will need to know different levels, and that's absolutely fine. But I love it when it's emailed, written down, it's on whiteboard, have it out there so everybody knows every day what we're striving for. Because I've never done anything successful on my own, and collaboration, everything is so much easier, so much more fun if you've got people around you. So if your ambition is to retire and sell the farm, a lot of these opportunities are never advertised because someone will speak to the land agent, their accountant, their neighbour, and that farm is gone. So if you want to expand, you want to grow, you need to speak to these people and you need to tell them because a lot of the best opportunities are never advertised. Next slide, please. So once we've decided what our vision and dream goal is, it's really important to be honest within the family. And this can be the hardest bit. But the sooner you start, before there's health issues, before there's financial issues, before there's a family fallout, we can be more open. We can actually have a bit of fun with it, and we can have a bit of banter. And some families, you know, they can do this with no outside support. We maybe meet up on a Sunday afternoon after we've had a lovely roast dinner. We sit down and we have an update where we all are. But it's when there's a bit of a disagreement, and sometimes when I say to families, what makes you happy? What do you want? And some people don't actually know what the concept of being happy is. So they don't know, or they don't upset people. But what may be better start saying was, what would make you unhappy? What would be a really bad outlook be for you? So having this boundary family, and it isn't easy, and sometimes there can be blow-offs, but the sooner you start, you can set the scene, dip the toe in, break the ice, and just keep working at it gently. But it is really important to regularly have these meetings, have an agenda, and get everything written down. Because sometimes, sadly, people never get round to doing the wills, power of attorney. So these meetings written down are so important, because then at least we know what was agreed, what the intentions were. But it also has some accountability. But also, it means that we all remember the same thing that came out in the meeting, because as many people goes to a meeting and they have maybe 4 different ideas of what was said. So have a meeting, have an agenda, and get it written down. Next slide, please. And small steps. When you're looking at succession, when you're looking at planning for your future, create your plan, write it down, what your dream is, what your ambition is, then take advice. And a lot of farmers are allergic to professional fees. How much? Or we can save that, we don't need to pay it. Really invest in it. And if the people you're speaking to are not your kind of people, they don't speak your language, they're using a lot of jargon, they're saying no, move on. Find someone that gets you, that understands your dream, your goal, and as long as it's legal, you know, the best advice you will find them. And it's not always the biggest company, it's not always the most expensive, but it's the people that get you and have your back and sort of think, yeah, this, have you thought about this? We can do this, let's work together. You will have to drive this. You will not always be popular, and it will be really difficult at times, but you will have to keep control. You'll have to push people, you have to put deadlines in, and you must read the emails, the paperwork, you must dot your I's and cross your T's. And keep up the communication with the family. Have a family WhatsApp group, have a family email, set meetings in place quarterly, because if it's not set in place, it doesn't happen and timelines can slip. Some families will never be able to have constructive conversations within the family without an outside facilitator. So it could be someone like myself or any of the ladies that are in this panel today. It could be a family member, because when you have a facilitator, it keeps order and manners within the room. We make sure questions that need to be asked that are maybe a little sensitive, a little emotive, are not avoided. We need to know what is going to happen if someone dies, what is going to happen if someone leaves, what is going to happen if someone is ill, who is going to take over the business, how do you feel about that, have they got the skills? Well, actually, we don't trust you, we don't think you've got the capability, this is what we need to see you showing us before you'll be able to get the next step within the business. So it's really important sometimes to have this facilitator. And the other thing facilitators do, they actually get it written down and the dates and the meetings happen, because often when it's just the family, something crops up and it's easy to avoid. Wills and power of attorney. Karen will go into this a bit more. So important. How many of you that are listening have got an up-to-date will and an up-to-date power of attorney that is signed and that has got the right executors and trustees and that people know where they are? So, so important. Company and partnership. We've talked a little bit about that. Do you know your company structure? Do you know if you're a partner of the business? Do you know what you're a partner of? Do you know what is in the partnership? And is the partnership or the company structure fit for purpose for where the company is now? Because it maybe was 5, 10, 15, 30 years ago, but maybe now if you've diversified other people in, you maybe need to look at a different structure. And have you got the paperwork? This is really important. Before you do anything on succession, you need to know your numbers. You need to know where you are, how effective the business is, how profitable the business is, how it's performing. So you cannot really go forward, because some people think they've got an awful lot, a massive pie, and there's an awful lot of opportunities. But some of the most flashiest, nicest looking businesses are maybe heavily geared, heavily borrowed, are also maybe got tiers of complication and legacy issues in there as well. And also, I sometimes see some very small businesses that actually are really well invested. They've got a lot of properties, a lot of pension opportunities, got a lot of diversification. So there's maybe more to diversify and to look at for your succession as well. And next slide, please. but it is not easy, and don't stop if you get knocked back the first time. Sometimes it can be complicated, and that's why I really urge all families to start sooner than later. The sooner you start the conversation, there might be a bit of tax planning involved, there might be some legal work involved, there might have a few generations of legacy that we need to unravel as well. So it's not all straightforward, but don't be put off, because trust me, the best thing you can do for your family, for your legacy, for your future, is to start the conversation, pick up the phone, drop us all an email, and we will help you work through what can be a challenging thing, but also can be one of the greatest and liberating opportunities for your family. Thank you.
Huge thank you very much. I have got a question, and it's going back to Laura. How much detail should you go into when splitting out your overheads, Laura? When sharing labour and machinery, etc., we find it very difficult.
That's a really good question, and I think quite often it's the overhead cost that can be tricky. I guess, for example, things like the necessity to have a tractor or a straw chopper or those kind of things, and I think you have to go down to as much detail as you possibly can, down to even so much as would you need to employ that person if you did not have that enterprise? So I think the value in it is to be as detailed as possible. You can always, you could just proportion out a labour cost, or you could proportion out, say, a shed requirement cost, or a land rent cost, which is quite often that's often where it gets sticky, is rent and wages. But it's really important to try and go down to as much detail as possible.
Thank you. And I guess just by starting off as well, so if you have a tractor and you're using it across different enterprises, your gut feeling of what that percentage would be your starting point, really, wouldn't it? Because you're going to have a rough idea, and something's better than nothing.
Yeah, and I think quite often what I find a lot more people do now is actually, and I know it maybe sounds a bit daft, but to actually write down numbers, how much of your day goes to each enterprise, how much of your day will be feeding sheep, will be checking cows, and how much of your time in a tractor will be allocated to one thing. And that allows you to, it doesn't necessarily answer any questions sometimes, because but it certainly is a starting point, like you say. Doreen, you just really need to start considering it, and often once you start to actually consider different enterprises, it all becomes a bit clearer. But just write everything down in a little notepad, even if you think you look a little bit mad, just write everything down.
Lovely, right, thank you. And thank you again, Heather, that was brilliant. And I've got some more questions, but we'll come back to them in a wee minute. Without any further ado then, Karen, can we introduce? I'm sorry you've got the end, but you're just more important than probably getting things in place. So I'll hand over to yourself.
I'm used to being at the coos tail, so it's all right, we'll bring up the rear. I'm Karen Baird, I'm a solicitor in South West Scotland, so if you are in England and listening to this, please don't ignore what I'm saying. There are differences in the law, but the fundamentals of having a will, having a power of attorney and planning are the same no matter where you are in the world. But England, Scotland, it doesn't matter. Just don't give up on me yet. Not all solicitors are boring. We act for rural farmers, large firms, small firms, and I think the key that Heather's picked up upon and everybody keeps saying here is about relationships. If you don't like the old family lawyer that everybody's always used, go and find another one. We're big people, we can take it, and it's about, if we get on with the client, you then do more, and it all flows better. A lot of people say to us all the time, but I don't need a solicitor. I haven't got anything that I need at the moment. Well, plan for the worst and hope for the best. Almost in that reverse psychology type way. If you've done it and organised it, it's not going to happen. If you haven't, chances are it might. Stop Googling legal advice. Genuinely, if you sit there and go, I've had a look, or I've chatted to my friend and they've had this situation, Everybody's family situation is different. Every farm is different. We're talking about this in the numbers. There are tools to help you with your farm that are general, but then they need to be specific to your farm. Legal advice is no different. And again, picking up on something Heather's already said, what you do discuss and where you get to in those chats, have it in writing. We always bang on about it in the law, but people understand something at the time. Your solicitor can put into words to document to make sure it's clear, so that in 5, 10, 15 years down the line, when somebody else is picking up that document, they know exactly what you were meaning at that time. Having that is invaluable, because memories can change, perception can change, people can get married and have spouses that have different opinions and change the whole dynamics of the family. So it's important to accurately record what you're doing at each stage, and that may be by way of a written minute of agreement that everybody has signed up to, so that then there can be no dispute in the future. Next slide, please. We all make excuses. Oh no, sorry, I'm on a different slide. I printed a different set. A will. Everybody needs a will, because I hate to break it to you, everybody's going to die. So we need to be planned and organised. If you want what you want to happen, it needs to be in writing. It's back to the same old theme. A will is a written document setting out what's going to happen. And if you don't have one, the laws in the country you live in dictate what happens. Now in Scotland, and certainly for us, the cost of a simple will is £200 plus VAT. It's not this enormous cost that everybody is allergic to. If you die without a will in Scotland, it's at least £1,000 plus VAT. So it's a massive difference. People don't think there is a cost if you die without a will. It's much bigger. Now, we have to give you the costs up front. England is the same in terms of transparency. Solicitors now have to be more transparent with their fees, make sure they're saying what it is. So you walk in and you say, what's a will going to be? And the solicitor will give you that information. So if you don't like it, you can walk away, but you know what you're getting from the beginning. Why should you have one? Well, I've already touched upon it. You're going to die, so why not make sure everybody who's left behind knows exactly what you want to happen and your assets go to where you want to go to. It's also important in terms of tax planning to make sure your estate is set up so that you're doing things at the right times to minimise tax, because none of us like to pay tax, but plan for it, sit down, have that conversation, make sure it's organised. I do hear I don't have a lot of money, particularly from farmers. I haven't got anything, I haven't got anything to leave. Everybody has something, everybody. And therefore it's really important to make sure that you have the right people in place to go forward and set that up in terms of your wishes. Heather as well touched upon your executors. Putting in place the right people to manage your affairs is really important, and sometimes it can be professionals, sometimes it can be family members, it can be anybody, but it's important that they know what you want. So we're getting back to this same theme, communicate with people now, because once you're gone, you cannot tell them what you wanted, and they have to do what they believe is the best thing at the time. If we get the slides back up, onto a power of attorney. What is a power of attorney? It's a document that you don't, I hope you create and it gathers dust and is never needed, because it is a written document for you giving the authority to somebody else to act on your behalf in life. So it only regulates in lifetime, and it sets out you saying that they can sign checks on your behalf. They can go and speak to the solicitor, they can speak to the accountant, they can set up things with the bank, they can move and transfer and sell things. It covers everything that you would normally do. It can do as much or as little as you want it to do. It is totally within your power. A lot of people think, oh, well, we're in a partnership, it's okay. Or I'm married, my husband or my wife can do those things for me. None of that in law makes any difference. You are your own legal entity, and only you have the power to act. So you have to give these powers in writing by a power of attorney. You can remove somebody if you fall out with them in the future, so that happens. You can appoint somebody now, and if things change, life changes, you can swap people in and out. Again, this question, but I haven't got any money. You might have an overdraft, you might need professionals, you might need all sorts of things. It's much better to have it there, do it now, put it in the drawer and forget about it. And I genuinely hope it's something that gathers dust and isn't needed. But if it is, if you have an accident on the farm, if you, a lot of people think it's when you get old and have dementia. That's not the case. Anything could happen now. So you don't know what's going to happen. Prepare for it. Again, in terms of cost, it's £200 to £400, depending on where you go and what you do, with an £81 registration fee. So it's not insurmountable. But if you don't have that, your family are completely stuck. And in Scotland, you would then have to apply for the guardianship, and you're thinking £5,000 to £6,000 with ongoing regular costs. So the cost of not having it is far greater than having it. Next slide, please. We all make excuses. I'm too young. I don't want to talk about it with my loved ones. They may get upset. I don't even want to think about it. I don't want a family dispute. They're all things that Heather's touched upon, and all things we bury our head in the sand and we'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow you may have that accident. Tomorrow something may happen to the child. Tomorrow's in your family. Tomorrow will come, and you need to prepare now. And it's much better to communicate now, because if they know what you want and you know what you want, everything runs smoother in the long run. It's so, so, so important to talk, and it's not something farmers, in my experience, being married to one, are very good at. Next slide, please. Other things to bear in mind. Quite often we get people coming in that are really worried about family members getting married and then what's going to happen on divorce. So as soon as their child's getting married, they're asking, how do I protect against this horrible person that they've married? Well, again, you hope for the best, but you still need to plan for the worst and have that. But don't worry about it. Come and ask us, come and chat to us about it. Have that conversation now. Care home charges are something that are becoming more and more and more prevalent. People are more and more frightened of the costs of them. And when you sit and break down somebody's individual circumstances, actually they're not as scary as they think. They're not going to take away your houses if you can generate an income and how you have your family estate set up. So my advice always with these things that you worry about is work out what you want, which is what Heather's touched upon. Work out what you want, then sit with your professionals and talk about the things that worry you, and plan your own circumstances. Plan what you want to happen within the context and know, so then you don't have to worry about it anymore, and you can get on with focusing on the figures and making sure your farm is performing as good as it can. And my last slide, I think. Support. We all need support throughout life, and in farming I think it's become more and more isolated because we're all on our own, but actually reach out, you know, build relationships. Professionals are here, and yes, we do need paid occasionally, but there's many a time a client will pick up the phone to me and have a chat about something, and we don't automatically start and stop the clock, because that's part of the relationship, that's part of our support, and we know in the fullness of time we're there to support and help go through and give that information, and make sure the advice that you're taking is from the right people and the right sources, and that you have confidence in them. And if you don't, go and find somebody that you do have confidence in.
Lovely, thank you very much, Karen. Well done. Right, this I think I'm taking away quite a few points here. I think from everything that I'm hearing here, I think we should all start with the end in mind and then work backwards from what I'm hearing. And communication is absolutely key. Everybody should start talking and should start talking now. There is a few questions coming in. I'm just going to finish off the slides here with a little, just touching on the Future Farming Resilience Fund that Laura mentioned earlier. It is a fund that has been set up by DEFRA, and I think it's 10.3 million pounds. It's been set up to help farmers within England across all sectors to see how resilient they are for the sake of the single farm payment disappearing or the subsidy disappearing. Emily, next slide, please. So AHDB are also part of this. So I have got Sarah in the background in case there's any questions coming in, but we have got contact details there if anybody wants to get involved and get involved through us. But as Laura said, there is a lot of other consultants. So the first place to go, first protocol, is go to the existing consultant that you're already working with and see if they're part of this, and feeling that, come and speak to us, and we'll put you in the right, point you in the right direction. Okay, next slide, Laura, I think is questions. So we've got some questions coming in for everybody here. Going back, Laura, I'm going to go back to you. Going back to what we're talking about, splitting out. I think, yeah, Laura is still there. How about quantifying your own labour input as a cost? What's the best way to do that, especially if you're covering a variety of jobs on the farm?
unpaid farm labour is the least quantifiable thing within agriculture. I think there's been lots of different people have been trying to actually quantify that over the past few years and struggling. I think it just has to be on an hourly basis. And I guess with regards to the cost to the business, that to an extent will be related a little bit to your private drawings. But I think it's so important to understand how much, first of all, how much unpaid labour is actually going on within your farm. And then to work out on an hourly basis what you're doing and what it relates to. Because quite often there's a lot of really interesting figures on sheep enterprises, and the difference between a profitable sheep enterprise and a non-profitable sheep enterprise is nearly always unpaid labour, and that is something that is so very important to quantify. To try and work out, is it actually worthwhile to have store lambs, to do something that, an additional enterprise. And, maybe you might find once you quantify those hours you're putting into it and maybe some of the other overhead costs, you might give yourself a bit of a fright, I think, to actually work out how much you're getting back from each individual enterprise. But really, just a little bit like I said before, just write it down, because you all think you remember what you do on a day-to-day basis and how much time you spend, but very rarely do you, especially as you get older, you don't really remember very much. But it's really important to write it down and keep a tally on it week on week. And I know it'll change a little bit on season, but just write it down.
Perfect. And I know certainly with the KPI Express and with Farm Bench, etc., we use £30,000 imputed labour cost, because if you're comparing yourself to other farms that are potentially got more labour units, then you have to put a value on what you're doing to make sure that that's also included.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to quantify, and it's a figure that most not most, a lot of businesses don't actually regard as a cost. And once you actually do start to write down and quantify the amount of unpaid labour that goes on within any given farm, the number can be high. And I think 30,000 is probably a very good benchmark for that.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. Heather, there was a question about your facilitation. Facilitators, external facilitators, is it a good idea to have an off-farm meeting, and who would you encourage to have as your facilitator?
Me!
Oh, surprise.
Why would you need anyone else? So yes, having them off farm is good because you haven't got distractions. It's amazing the amount of family meetings I go to, and someone's up and down off the kitchen table, boiling the kettle, making meals, your mobile phone's going, or someone's chapping at the door or knocking at the window. So the good thing about going externally is you turn all your phones off, you haven't got interruptions, and you're there for a set time, you get the job done and you leave. Facilitators, external, it really varies. There's a lot of funding out there as well at the moment, in Scotland in particular, but it's not the end of the world, but it is a cost. But I think people take this business, their meetings more seriously if they are paying for an independent facilitator. But sometimes it's a family friend, sometimes it's a land agent, accountant, it could be the bank manager. It's someone that you all respect and who you view as independent. I think that is absolutely key. But you can have it at the farmhouse as well. But I think having them set out once a year, you review it, where you are, how's it all gone, who's doing what, you set each other roles and tasks, and you put deadlines that these are going to be achieved by, so then you can keep seeing progress. Because some families say, oh, we're doing really well, we all know what we're doing, we're very open, everyone knows where they are. But then I hear another generation say, yeah, we talk about it, but we don't actually do anything. And I think that's why it's good to have the meeting set and independent.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Heather. Karen, there's a question come in for you. How easy is it to challenge a will?
Is that England or Scotland? I don't know in England, but you pretty much can't challenge one in Scotland. It's really, really difficult in Scotland because you can't challenge the content in Scotland. You would claim your legal rights as a child. In England, it is a totally different system and seems to be a lot more straightforward. So I would encourage you to go and have a chat to a local solicitor if that's an English question. But in Scotland, you're pretty much knackered.
Okay.
That's a technical legal term.
That's a technical term, yeah. Yeah, and similarly, there's another one. Is there any way you can prevent someone challenging your will? So you've answered that more or less.
Yeah, it's again in Scotland particularly, and the biggest way to prevent somebody challenging is having a solicitor preparing it. That would account across border, because solicitors have an independent, a professionalism, and we have a duty to take instructions. So we have to make sure that we haven't been influenced and the person is throughout. Yes, Heather?
How important is it to have a letter of wishes alongside a will?
Not as important as containing it in the document, because a letter of wishes could be ignored. It's only what you would like. So your detail should always be contained within the 4 corners of the legal document. That's a basic legal principle. If it's within the 4 corners of the deed, it will be taken into consideration and has to be. Anything else is peripheral and could be ignored. So it's important for those around you, but we always talk of the 4 corners of the deed. But in terms of making your own will as bulletproof as possible, that's where a solicitor really, really does help, because we have that independence, the accountability, and we're the ones responsible. So then it becomes the solicitor's lookout if something hasn't gone as you wish or as a beneficiary wishes.
Perfect, thank you very much. And I've got one last question, and I think timing wise it's going to fit in quite nicely. Ailey, I think this one's for you. Would you recommend, who would you recommend to, or could you recommend to speak to your accountant to better understand the partnership commitment? So I suppose as a partner of a business, to better understand what that commitment is. Would that be yourself or as an accountant that you could speak to better understand that?
Yeah, so we would happily speak to somebody about understanding the partnership, but also we would usually suggest people speak to a lawyer as well. If you're getting involved in a partnership, you would want to make sure that there was a partnership agreement drawn up, and it would be a lawyer that would do that. So it'd be a bit of both really. Us and a lawyer could help with that and explain, what you're taking on by joining a partnership.
Yeah, cool. And that goes for everybody involved. Heather?
In England, I think accountants can draw those up as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer as well in England. So it possibly, I think accountants has more power over partnership agreements.
In England, the partnership's slightly different than in Scotland. So I think that'd be why.
Okay. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I say, for the sake of time, we have got 2 minutes left. So I have got one more slide. Thank you very much, ladies. Does anybody have any final take-home messages that they want to send out to our audience today? I guess mine is just pick up the phone, speak, talk to us. Communication is key. Have those difficult conversations, I think, and do it now. So my last couple of slides is just a summary, and it's just, if we can go on to there, upcoming events from AHDB. We have got some upcoming dairy events. We're out on farm again as best as we can. We are also trying to keep up with the digital delivery as well. And the beef and lamb events, there's some new monitor farms, which is the next slide, I think, Emily. There's monitor farms, new launches, so there's some face-to-face events, and there's also some webinars online. These are all part of the presentation, so you can all capture them and contact them or get in touch. So finally, I think the last slide for me is just to say a huge thank you for your time, and that goes for everybody watching today, for your participation and your attention. We will send out everybody's contact details, so please do not fail to pick up the phone if you've got any questions at all and get in touch with any one of us. Thanks again, and goodbye, and have a lovely rest of the day.